They handed her a dead station to keep her quiet. She had already mailed the evidence before they knew she had it. Nora Voss, 23 years old, sat alone at the witness table and opened the manila folder. Harrow's hands went flat on the table the moment she did it. Flat and still, like a man who has just heard the bolt slide home on a door he thought he controlled. The hearing room was wood-paneled, windowless. 12 officials sat elevated in the gallery above her. Single fluorescent panel overhead. The smell of old carpet and recycled air. Senator Gerald Ashford sat at the center of the gallery with his reading glasses resting in his left hand. Major Aldrich Harrow sat 3 seats to his right in full-dress uniform, ribbons slightly crooked on his left breast pocket. Daniel Morrow sat beside Harrow in a civilian suit, a silver pen resting across 2 fingers. Neither of them spoke. Nobody in that room had expected a 23-year-old to walk in carrying 40 years of their failure in a manila folder. What none of them knew yet was how long she had been carrying it and what she had already done to make sure they could never take it back. Senator Ashford removed his reading glasses slowly, holding them by one arm. He looked at Nora across the length of the room. "How long did you know," he said, "before you filed?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Harrow did not turn to look at Morrow. Morrow did not click his pen. The 2 general-grade officers in the far corner exchanged nothing, not a word. Not a look. Nora opened her mouth. "Before we tell you how a 23-year-old with a suspended clearance walked into that hearing room and brought down a network 4 decades in the making, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. And here is what you need to understand before we go further. The room she was sitting in was never supposed to exist. The folder on the table was never supposed to reach Washington, and the woman holding it was never supposed to find anything at all. Because the people who sent her to Fort Whitmore Signals Annex had specifically chosen that station because nothing was ever found there. They were wrong about that, but they had 11 months before they figured it out. Cut back, 11 months earlier. Freeze on Nora's hand, the outer edge of her right palm, ink-stained and slightly swollen at the knuckle, smoothing the bent pages of the legal pad she has just retrieved from under the console. The pages are crinkled where the metal spine of a rolled legal pad struck them. Her hand moves across the paper slowly, methodically. The building is single-story concrete, no windows on the exterior facing the road. Cold War era, built into the eastern shoulder of an Appalachian ridge like it was ashamed of itself. A laminated placard is bolted to the doorframe beside the entrance. Nora reads it as she walks through. She reads it twice, then she walks in. Inside, the receivers hum at a frequency just below hearing. You feel it in the back of your teeth rather than hear it with your ears. The smell is machine oil and recycled air and something older underneath both, a mineral staleness that belongs to rooms that have not been opened in a long time. 3 rows of consoles. Most of the monitoring stations are dark. A handwritten index card taped above the center receiver bank reads, "Atmospheric monitoring. Log all anomalous readings as a TM interference. No further action." Below it, on the desk, sits a rubber stamp with the same phrase already inked and ready. This is not an assignment. This is a filing cabinet, and Nora Voss has just been filed. Major Aldrich Harrow stood at the front of the room for the station's morning formation. He was 57, Garrison straight, contemptuous in the particular way of men who have been told for 20 years that their contempt is leadership. He looked at Nora the way a man looks at furniture he did not order and cannot return. Specialist Dex Calloway stood 2 positions down from her, a half-finished energy drink already sweating rings into the equipment manifest he was supposed to be reading. He was 25. He looked like someone who had learned early that the safest thing to be was agreeable. "Any questions?" Harrow said. He was already looking past her. Nora said nothing. Calloway caught her in the corridor after formation, voice dropping as he glanced at the equipment manifest she had already started annotating in the margins. "You don't have to mark all of that," he said. "It just slows down the filing." She looked at him once. His energy drink can was damp in his hand. His eyes moved off hers quickly. She did not respond. That night at 0200 hours, Harrow entered the signals room without knocking. Nora was at receiver bank C, legal pad dense with frequency notations, 17 entries, cross-referenced, each one dated in time to the second. Harrow crossed the room in 4 steps. He snatched the legal pad off the console, rolled it tight, struck her open palm with the metal spine, hard enough to split the skin at the outer knuckle. "Doodles," he said. "I run a listening post, not a daycare." He dropped the pad. He kicked it under the console with his boot heel. He left. She did not move. Not a flinch, not a blink, not a sound. She waited until his footsteps died on the concrete floor outside. Then she got down on one knee, reached under the console, and retrieved the pad. She smoothed the crinkled pages one by one. She pressed the ink-stained outer edge of her palm flat against the top sheet to straighten it. Then she went back to work. At 03:17 hours, receiver bank C emitted a burst transmission. Short, compressed, unmistakably structured. Not drift, not static, not atmospheric scatter. A signal, riding a frequency band that the station's own index card classified as dead. Nora's hand went still over the pad. She leaned forward. She checked the band marker twice. The frequency was registered as decommissioned in 1987. It should have been silent for 36 years. It was not silent. She did not know that the frequency she was hearing at 03:17 hours would still be transmitting at dawn, or that by morning she would have 3 pages of proof in her own hand, proof that Major Harrow had ordered erased from every official record 36 years ago. The morning after the first burst transmission, Nora had not slept. The legal pad on the console had 3 pages of notations, every entry dated, timed to the second, cross-referenced against the frequency index she had pulled from the operational log the night before. The operational log was supposed to be read-only access. It was. She had read it. Nora wrote 3 more lines. She capped the pen. She stared at the notation. What transmits on a dead frequency? What needs a dead frequency? She did not have an answer yet. She had data. She had pattern. She had a memo to write. The memo was 2 paragraphs. No hedging, no softening, no conditional language. Frequency band, timestamp, burst duration, signal structure, deviation from atmospheric scatter baseline. She left it on Harrow's desk at 07:30 hours. By 1400 hours, it was back on her console, face down. She turned it over. Atmospheric interference. No further action. The stamp was pressed so hard it had bled through to the back of the page. He had not read past the first line. She could tell because the crease from his folding was diagonal, covering everything below the frequency notation, and his fold was impatient, not the fold of a man who had read something and considered it. The fold of a man who had already decided. She filed the memo in her active log. She dated the stamp's return. She noted the time. That was week 2. She still had 10 months to go. The equipment manifest sat on the corner of the console, a 3-inch binder held together with 2 rubber bands that had dried and cracked from the recycled air. She had been annotating it since day 1 because Harrow had assigned her to maintain it. Every reel, every intake date, every supply requisition referenced against actual hardware inventory. The work was designed to be invisible, inventory that no one checked against anything, numbers that were supposed to go nowhere. Nora did not do invisible work carelessly. She had already noted something about the supply requisition accounts, not what it meant, not yet. But the accounts had a particular structure. 11 consecutive fiscal years of entries, same routing codes, same administrative classification, same figures recurring with a precision that organic supply management never produced. She did not flag it. She logged it as background. She folded a dated notation into the manifest's inside cover and kept working. 11 years, the same accounts, the same routing. She would come back to that. The admin clerk rotation had run for 3 weeks before Harrow assigned her permanently to receiver bank C. During those 3 weeks, she had been issued a temporary key to the station's HR annex, a concrete room off the main corridor, 2 filing cabinets, a small desk, personnel evaluations stacked in hanging folders by year. She had returned the key. The morning she turned it in, Harrow had not looked up from his desk. What she had not returned was what she had read in there. Harrow's psychological evaluation, dated 2018, was 16 pages. She had read it once, standing in front of the open cabinet while the ventilation hummed and the fluorescent tube blinked once every 40 seconds. Authority-dependent decision-making, above-average susceptibility to directive pressure from senior superiors, predictable escalation pattern when institutional authority was challenged from below. She had not taken notes. She had not needed to. She read the way she logged frequencies, completely, once, without missing anything. She knew exactly how he would move. She knew when. She knew the threshold. She said none of this to anyone. On the same afternoon she returned the HR annex key, she had found a business card tucked inside a procedural manual on the annex's desk. The manual was Fort Whitmore's Civilian Personnel Grievance Protocol, a document so outdated that its header still listed a fax number. The card was from a civilian attorney in Boston, no firm name. Just the name, a phone number, and the word litigation in small caps below it. Nora slid the card into the outer pocket of her jacket. She did not make a production of it. She was alone in the room. She turned the procedural manual face down the way it had been and walked out. The card was still in the jacket. She had not used it yet. The morning of the second week's formation, Harrow stood at the front of the room with the casualness of a man who had run the same briefings so many times it no longer required thought. He glanced at Nora once, the kind of glance that is really a dismissal, and said to no one specific that atmospheric monitoring required minimal technical background, which was why it was suitable for personnel in the early stages of their posting. The room had 4 people in it: Harrow, Nora, Calloway, a signals technician who was counting the hours until his rotation ended and kept his eyes on the floor. Nora waited until Harrow finished. 11 years, she said. Harrow's eyes moved to her, flat and cold. The station's active log. 11 years of recorded anomalies across all monitored bands. She kept her voice level, precise, no edge in it. Total anomalies logged, 437. Total filed as atmospheric interference, 437. Total resulting in any follow-up action, 0. Nobody spoke. Not one anomaly in 11 years produced a response. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. I wanted to make sure I understood the standard correctly before I submitted further documentation. Harrow did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was one of the things the 2018 evaluation had noted specifically, controlled affect as a dominant signal. You understood correctly, he said. Is that all, Voss? Yes, sir. Calloway looked at his energy drink can, his thumb pressed into the dent near the pull tab. He did not look at Nora. Harrow's response came 2 hours later. He pulled her from receiver bank C for the afternoon and handed her a list: equipment inventory, tape reel management by serial number, filing of the previous quarter's atmospheric logs. He held the list out without looking at her and said, "You want to log frequencies, Voss? Log these. Every reel, every date, every atmospheric nothing. That's your signal work." He smiled when he said it. The smile was unhurried. He believed this was containment. She took the list. She started with the tape reels. That evening, Nora placed a call from the duty phone in the corridor. Margaret Voss answered on the second ring. In the background, the faint domestic sound of something on the stove. Pot roast, probably. It was a Tuesday. Nora could picture the cashmere cardigan, the kitchen, the framed photograph on the mantel that she had not seen in 4 months. "How is it?" Margaret asked. "Fine." "Is it what you hoped?" Nora looked at the concrete wall across the corridor. "It has potential." A pause. Margaret never pushed. That was one of her qualities. She asked once and accepted the answer she got. "The mortgage cleared," Margaret said. "The enlistment bonus came through last week. $4,200, right on schedule." "Good. I'm not keeping track," Margaret said. "I just wanted you to know." She was keeping track. They both knew it. The mortgage was $4,200 a month. The enlistment bonus covered the shortfall. Without it, Margaret's salary from the school district administrative office was $300 short every month. In 6 months, $300 short became a conversation with the bank. In 12 months, it became a different kind of conversation. "Everything is fine," Nora said. "Don't worry about it." "I never worry," Margaret said. She was lying affectionately. The call lasted 3 minutes. Nora hung up and went back to the tape reels. What she had not said and would not say: if Harrow filed a formal charge, her clearance would be suspended pending review. A suspended clearance meant a suspended posting. A suspended posting meant the bonus stopped. The timeline from there to foreclosure on Margaret's house was not abstract. It was 6 months. She had calculated it. That was the number she carried. 6 months. Not as a fear, as a deadline. She worked faster. Calloway watched her annotated logs from the far end of the console bank. He never asked about them. He never contributed a notation of his own. But when she set a page face down while she cross-referenced another sheet, she came back to find the face-down page had moved 3 inches toward his elbow. Not by much. Not in a way he could be confronted with. Just enough to read. She noted it. She said nothing. Was he curious? Possibly. Was his curiosity personal or operational? She did not have enough data yet. She logged the behavior the same way she logged the frequency anomaly, as a pattern that required more data before it became a conclusion. The second burst transmission arrived at 0211 hours on the 9th day of her posting. Same frequency band, different cipher variant. If the first burst had been a test of equipment, this one was a test of patience. Shorter, more compressed, the structure tighter. Not the same sender generating noise. the same sender refining technique. Nora documented it in triplicate. First copy, her active log, dated and timestamped, flipped to the frequency analysis she had run manually using the station's calibration tables. Second copy, folded into the equipment manifest's inside cover, nested between a tape reel intake form from 3 fiscal years prior and a supply requisition summary that she had not yet fully cross-referenced. Third copy, sealed in a plain envelope, addressed to the civilian attorney whose card she had found in the HR annex. She wrote the address in block letters, pressing hard with the pen, the ink stain spreading slightly onto the outer edge of her right palm the way it always did. She did not mail the third copy. Not yet. She placed the sealed envelope inside her field manual between pages 140 and 141 and set the manual back in the stack beside the console. She was waiting. She needed more than 2 data points before she committed anything to a civilian legal record. 2 was a pattern, 3 was a case. The second memo reached Harrow's desk at 0730. By 1300 it was back, face down on her console, the stamp even harder this time. The red ink had spread at the corners. Atmospheric interference. No further action. She flipped it over. She added it to the log. The tape reel inventory took 4 days. On the third day, working through the supply requisition folders from the previous fiscal year, Nora opened a folder from 3 years prior and stopped. The line item was printed in standard administrative type, embedded between a HVAC maintenance charge and a replacement parts requisition for the antenna array. Easy to miss. Designed, she thought, to be missed. Annual budget allocation, administrative routing, $4.2 million. No corresponding operational output listed, no project code, no contracting authority, no personnel hours logged against it. Just the figure and a routing code that pointed back into the station's own administrative accounts. She stared at it. She pulled the folder from the year before that. Same line item, same figure, same routing code. Exact, not rounded, not approximately equal, identical to the dollar. Her hand did not move. She sat with the 2 folders open in front of her, one on each knee, the recycled air humming around her, the receivers going quiet in the way they did between transmission windows. $4.2 million, routed through the station. No output, no project, no trace of what it purchased. She pulled the folder from the year before that, same figure, same routing code. She counted backward through the stack, 11 folders, 11 consecutive fiscal years, the same $4.2 million, routed through Fort Whitmore's administrative accounts, producing nothing or nothing that anyone was supposed to see. Now she knew it was background to this. What she did not yet know was whose line item it was, whose $4.2 million, whose routing code, whose 11 years. She closed the folders. She placed them back in the stack exactly as she had found them. She returned to the console, opened the equipment manifest to the inside cover, and added a single dated notation below the second copy of the burst transmission analysis. She did not write what she suspected. She wrote what she had confirmed: the figure, the routing code, the count of consecutive fiscal years, 11, no output column, no corresponding project. She clipped the notation to the second copy of the burst transmission analysis, 2 data points that had just become 3. She capped the pen. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm was fresh, slightly damp. She pressed it flat against the top of the manifest to dry it. Across the room, the supply requisition folder sat in its place in the stack, exactly where she had returned it. The routing code was still printed on its front tab in standard administrative type, the kind of label no one read twice. The receiver bank beside her console began to hum, the pre-transmission cycle that preceded a burst window by 4 minutes. Her hand moved back to the legal pad, and then the door at the far end of the corridor opened, and Calloway walked in 12 minutes early for his shift, stopped when he saw her, and looked directly at the supply requisition folders stacked beside the console before he looked at her face. Calloway did not say anything, not immediately. He looked at the folders, then at her face, then back at the folders. His half-finished energy drink was in his left hand, condensation already forming on the can despite the cold, recycled air of the annex. He set it on the edge of the console without looking at it, the way a man sets something down when he needs his hands free. "You're early," he said. "You're earlier," Nora said. The silence between them was not comfortable. It was the particular silence of 2 people measuring what the other one knows. Calloway took a step toward the console, stopped. His voice dropped the way it always did when he was cornered, not lower in volume but softer in register, like something compressing under pressure. "Those aren't part of the signals logs," he said. "No," Nora said. "They're supply requisition records, open access tier, administrative classification." She paused. "Same as the equipment manifest." He did not answer that. She watched him the way the station's receivers watch dead frequencies, without expectation but without stopping. She noted the tension in his shoulders, the way he was not looking at the folders anymore, because looking at them again would confirm that he already knew what was in them. He was right-handed. His energy drink was still sweating on the console edge. He had arrived 12 minutes early for a shift he had never once arrived early for in the 3 weeks she had known him. "The receiver's about to cycle," she said. 4-minute window. Quick pause. "If you've made it this far, comment the word lantern below, then we continue the story." Calloway nodded. He moved to his station. He did not ask why she had the supply requisition folders out. He did not ask what the notation clipped to the burst analysis said. He did not ask anything at all, and the absence of those questions told her more than any answer he could have given. She turned back to the legal pad. The receiver began its pre-transmission hum. The envelope was still between pages 140 and 141 of her field manual. She had 3 data points: the burst transmissions on a dead frequency, the $4.2 million routing anomaly across 11 consecutive fiscal years, and now a 4th, small and unverified but real. Calloway had looked at the folders before he had looked at her face. 4 data points was not certainty, but it was no longer coincidence. She picked up the pen. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm had dried to a pale blue-gray, the color of something decided. She opened the field manual to page 140. She removed the envelope. She looked at the civilian attorney's name printed in the upper left corner of the card she had tucked inside it. Plain text, no title, just a name and a Boston address. She had been waiting until she was certain. She was certain enough. She pressed the envelope seal and set it face down on the legal pad. Beneath the morning's notations, beneath 11 fiscal years and 4 data points, and one colleague who had looked at the wrong thing first, she would mail it before the end of the shift. Within the hour, she would pull the shell entity audit log and find the same routing anomaly mirrored across 12 consecutive quarters. Identical to the dollar, no deviation, no human error, just a pattern too perfect to be anything but deliberate. The third memo landed on Harrow's desk on a Wednesday morning. She did not speculate. She did not editorialize. She listed what she had found and asked for guidance. At 14:15 hours, Harrow walked into the signals room. He did not knock. He did not look at her. He crossed the floor, took the memo from the corner of her console where she had placed it for review, and dropped it into the shredder mounted on the wall beside the equipment rack. The shredder ran for 4 seconds. Then Harrow turned and walked back toward the door. Nora did not move. Not a word. Not a flinch. He stopped with his hand on the doorframe. He did not turn around. "Voss." His voice was garrison-clipped, contemptuous but quiet, the contempt of a man who does not consider the target worth raising his voice for. "Next one goes in your file, not the shredder." The door closed. The shredder had stopped running. The receivers hummed. Calloway, at the far end of the console bank, had his eyes fixed on the frequency display in front of him, not on the shredder, not on the door, not on her. His energy drink sat at his elbow, untouched. He was very still in the way a man goes still when he is trying not to be noticed. Nora picked up the legal pad. She dated a new line at the top of the page. She wrote, "Memo 3, destroyed by Major Harrow at console shredder, 14:15 hours. No response issued. Verbal warning received." She pressed the pen down hard enough that the ink spread slightly onto the outer edge of her right palm. She capped the pen. She went back to the tape reel inventory. 3 days later, week 6, she found it. The 14th was a real order. Quantity, 48 units. Vendor code, a 6-digit number she did not recognize. She wrote the vendor code on the legal pad. She stared at it. Then she went to the quarterly audit log. The 3 shell entity codes she had pulled from the audit log 2 weeks earlier were listed as authorized vendors for administrative procurement. She lined them up against the vendor code from the real order. The third one matched. She pulled the real order again, then the audit log, then the appropriations appendix she had requested from the Annex's reference library, a declassified congressional document, publicly available, printed on paper so old it crinkled at the corners. She had asked the station's administrative desk for it 6 days ago under the pretext of updating the equipment manifest sourcing records. The $4.2 million was not a budget error. It was a spine, a routing structure. Money moving through shell entities into an administrative account at a station rated Category 4. Officially too low value to audit, too obscure to monitor, too inconsequential to warrant scrutiny. 11 consecutive fiscal years, the same figure, the same routing codes, and now 3 named entities in open congressional record. What did $4.2 million buy? She did not know yet, but she knew what it moved through. She needed the third data point to become something harder. She was close to hard. What was the $4.2 million paying for? Whatever answered that question would answer everything else. She turned back to the cipher variant logs and started from the beginning. Morrow arrived on a Tuesday, no advance notice. No transport vehicle in the gravel lot, a civilian sedan, dark gray, already dusty from the mountain road, parked at the edge of the lot when Nora arrived at 0630. He was inside the signals room when she got there, sitting at the console station adjacent to hers, not Calloway's. He had chosen the station closest to her frequency logs, which were stacked in the wire rack beside the equipment manifest. He was reading one. He was 54, silver-haired, institutional calm, the kind of man whose face revealed nothing because nothing had ever been allowed to show on it. He wore a civilian suit that fit well. His silver pen rested across 2 fingers of his right hand, not writing, just there, like a habit. Calloway stood at the far end of the room with his back to both of them, recalibrating a receiver that did not need recalibrating. His energy drink was on the console beside him. He had not looked up when Nora walked in. The administrative officer who had escorted Morrow in said, "DIA liaison, routine operational review. He'll need access to the intercept logs from the past 60 days. Then the administrative officer left, and it was the 3 of them, and the receiver hum, and the cold recycled air. Morrow read for 11 minutes. He did not ask questions. He turned pages the way a man turns pages when he is confirming what he already knows, not discovering something new. He reached the final annotated sheet, the routing anomaly cross-reference, the 3 shell entities, the fiscal year count, and he paused. Not long. 2 seconds. Then he set it face down on the rack. He clicked the silver pen. Once. These notations. His voice was level, bureaucratic, the tone of a man correcting a minor administrative error. Stop annotating. File everything you have logged since arrival as atmospheric noise and move on. All of it. Nora looked at him. I've reviewed your logs, specialist. He set the pen flat on the console. The signal environment here has always been noisy. That's why it's category 4. You're not finding anything. You're pattern matching noise. File it and stop. The silence that followed was not surprised. It was specific. The kind of silence a room produces when something just confirmed itself. She said, "Yes, sir." He picked up the pen. He clicked it once more. He stood, collected his jacket from the back of the chair, and walked out. The door did not slam. It closed with the soft mechanical precision of someone who has never needed to slam a door in his life. Nora sat still for a moment. The receiver bank beside her console had already cycled into its pre-transmission hum. 4 minutes to the next burst window. She could hear Calloway's breathing from across the room. Controlled. Too controlled. She reached under the console, pulled out the field manual, and opened it to page 140. The first sealed envelope was still there. She removed it. She placed it in her jacket pocket. She would mail it before the end of the day. She was done waiting for certainty. Morrow had just handed it to her. Calloway came to her console after Morrow's sedan had cleared the gravel lot. He walked slowly, the way a man walks when he has made a decision but has not committed to it fully yet. He set his energy drink down on the corner of her console without asking. "What did he say?" She told him. Exact words. Atmospheric noise. File it. Stop. Calloway's jaw tightened. Not surprise. She watched his face carefully, and there was no surprise in it, only a specific tension. The look of a man receiving information he had already anticipated but hoped would be different. He looked at his energy drink. He looked at the shredder on the wall. "You should probably do what he said." His voice dropped on the last word. Nora looked at him. "How long have you been assigned to Fort Whitmore?" A pause. 10 months. "How many anomalous intercepts did you log in those 10 months?" He shifted his weight. 4 or 5. Atmospheric scatter mostly. She knew from the station log he had logged 0, not 4 or 5, not 1, 0. She did not say that. She said, "Okay." She turned back to the console. Calloway stood there for 3 more seconds. She could feel him trying to decide whether to say something else. He picked up his energy drink. He went back to his station. He did not look at the frequency log she had in the wire rack. He did not look at the sealed envelope she had already put in her pocket. He looked at the receiver display and stayed there. She logged the conversation. Date, time, exact exchange. The fact that he looked at the shredder. She did not write what she suspected. She wrote what she had confirmed. 4 or 5 anomalous intercepts, 10 months, station log says 0. One data point about Callaway. Not enough for a conclusion, more than enough for a pattern. That evening, she mailed the first sealed envelope from the post office 12 miles from the base. The address on it was the civilian attorney's name in block letters, a Boston address, the ink slightly spread on the right edge where she had pressed the pen down hard. She drove back to base in the dark. The mountain road was empty. The annex lights were still on. Inside, the receivers were still humming, the way they had been humming for 11 consecutive fiscal years while $4.2 million moved through the station's accounts and produced nothing anyone was supposed to see. She went back to the cipher variant logs. She was looking for the 1983 KGB technical manual. It was filed in the Annex's Cold War Reference Archive under a label that read, Decommissioned Soviet Technical Assets, Inactive. She had seen it 2 weeks ago and set it aside. Now she pulled it from the shelf. She opened it to the cipher section. She started reading. It took 3 weeks to isolate the variant. Not because the work was slow, because she could only do it in fragments, between shift duties, between tape reel inventories, between Callaway's periodic slow walk past her console and back. The 1983 KGB technical manual documented a cipher variant in its 3rd chapter, developed for long-term sleeper network use, field-modified to survive on low-bandwidth equipment, designed to look on spectrum analysis like atmospheric scatter, like noise. The burst transmission she had been logging since week 2 matched the variant structure not approximately, precisely. The compression ratio, the frequency modulation pattern, the interburst timing interval, all of it corresponded to the 1983 field modification as documented in Chapter 3, pages 41 through 47 of the manual she was holding. She sat with that for a moment. She was holding a Soviet technical document describing a cipher variant that had been generating transmissions at Fort Whitmore for how long? She did not know. She had only 11 weeks of her own logs, but the equipment showed reception patterns in the archived calibration records going back further than her arrival, much further. Was this the $4.2 million? Was this what it was paying for? She ran the cipher variant against the partial recordings she had pulled from the Annex's archive, raw frequency captures filed as atmospheric interference by every analyst who had ever sat at this console. She ran a second pass. The partial plaintext came through at 23:47 hours on a Thursday night, the signals room dark except for her console light and the glow of the frequency display. 7 characters, an operational call sign. She stared at it. She ran the call sign against the registry. The match came back in 40 seconds. An active U.S. counterintelligence officer, currently serving. She read the entry 3 times. She set the registry down. She picked up the legal pad. She wrote, call sign, date, frequency, cipher variant, source manual citation, Chapter 3, pages 41 through 47, 1983. Then she wrote the match, the registry entry, the officer's active status, the date of the FOIA disclosure. Her hand was steady. She made it stay steady. She would mail it in the morning. She set the envelope on the corner of the console, face down, beneath the frequency log from the evening session. She looked at what she now had assembled. This was not noise. This was not atmospheric scatter. This was a network, and someone had been running it through this station, this Category 4, officially too low value to audit station, for years, maybe for decades. She thought about the oldest routing entry she had found, 11 consecutive fiscal years. When had it started before that? She did not know. She only had 11 years of administrative records to cross-reference, but someone knew. Someone had set this up. And someone had placed every analyst who had ever sat at this console in a position to dismiss what they found as noise. She looked across the room. Callaway was not at his station. He was standing at the edge of the console bank, watching her. He had been quiet enough that she had not heard him move. How long had he been standing there? His energy drink was in his hand. His face was doing something she had not seen on it before. Not curiosity, not the compressed nervousness of a man being careful. Something tighter, something that knew what it was looking at. He looked at the envelope on the corner of her console. You're making a mistake, he said, quietly, not aggressive, quieter than that. The voice of a man delivering a message he has been asked to deliver. Whatever you think you found, you're making a mistake. His hand was not steady on the energy drink. She could see it from where she sat. The can trembled slightly, just enough. What kind of mistake? She said. He did not answer. He looked at the envelope again. He looked at her face. He set his energy drink on the console. picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and walked out of the signals room. The door closed. Nora sat in the hum of the receivers and the cold recycled air. She looked at the envelope on the corner of her console. She looked at the field manual open beside it, the legal pad beside that, the ink stain on the edge of her palm. She thought about what Calloway's voice had sounded like, not his voice, the register. The drop at the end, the same drop she had heard when Morrow told her to file everything as atmospheric noise, the same institutional compression, not his words, Morrow's words coming out of Calloway's mouth. She had known Calloway was adjacent to the network. She had logged his behavior for weeks. The early arrival, the supply folder he had not touched but looked at, the 0 anomalous intercepts in 10 months, the way his jaw had moved when she told him what Morrow said. Now she had something harder than behavioral data. She added a notation to the legal pad. Date, time, Calloway's exact words, the tremor in his hand. She capped the pen. She was done with data points. She had what she needed. What she did not have, what she had been careful not to tell anyone, not to write in any document that could be reached from inside this building, was where the duplicate evidence sets were going. The civilian attorney's name was on 2 envelopes that had left Fort Whitmore, one mailed, one ready to mail in the morning. Calloway did not know the attorney's name. Morrow did not know the attorney's name. Harrow had shredded 3 memos and issued a verbal warning and thought the problem was contained. They thought she was a 23-year-old at a Category 4 station who had gotten close to something she did not understand. She was a 23-year-old at a Category 4 station who had understood it for 6 weeks and spent that time making sure they could never take it back. She picked up the envelope. She put it in her jacket pocket beside the one from the morning. She would mail both before 0800. "How is it?" Margaret asked. "Getting more complicated," Nora said. A pause. Margaret did not push. "The mortgage is current," she said. "Last payment cleared fine." "Good. That's all I'm saying," Margaret said. "I know," Nora said. She hung up. She stood in the corridor for a moment. The recycled air smelled of machine oil. Somewhere in the annex, a receiver cycled through its pre-transmission hum, building toward the next burst window the way it always did, the way it had been doing since before she arrived, the way it had been doing, she now understood, for years. She went back into the signals room. She sat at her console. She pulled the legal pad toward her. She had 2 sealed envelopes in her jacket pocket. She had never told anyone what she suspected. She had only ever written what she confirmed. She was still writing. She had just picked up the pen when the signals room door opened and Calloway walked back in. He was not carrying his jacket anymore. He had a folder with him. Not from the rack, not from the equipment manifest, not from the reference library, from his personal locker. She could tell by the crease on the cover, the particular crumple of something that had been folded once and stored in a space too small for it. He crossed the floor without speaking and set it on her console. She opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper, her name at the top in standard administrative type, flagged for administrative review, unauthorized frequency access, dated 2 days prior, Morrow's initials in the bottom right corner. She looked at the sheet for a long moment, then she looked at Calloway. He was standing on the far side of the console with his arms at his sides. The energy drink was gone. His hands were empty. That was new. "Morrow asked me to deliver it," he said. She said nothing. "It's a courtesy," he said. "Before it goes formal, you still have time to amend your logs, file everything under atmospheric interference, walk it back." She set the sheet down on the console. She smoothed it flat the way she had smoothed the legal pad pages after Harrow kicked them under the console. Same pressure, same deliberateness, same nothing in her face. "Walk it back," she said. "They're not asking you to lie," Calloway said. "They're asking you to recategorize." There's a difference. She had heard that word before. Atmospheric interference, no further action. Recategorize, the institutional vocabulary of burial. "Go home, Dex," she said. He didn't move. His voice dropped the way it always did when he was cornered. "Nora, the process that buries you takes 5 years. It leaves nothing behind. That's not a threat. That's how it works. I've watched it work." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. The half-finished drink gone. The nervous filler words compressed into something harder by 2 years of running errands for a network he had told himself were harmless. He believed it would bury her. He had watched it bury others, and he believed it completely. "I know," she said. He waited for more. There was no more. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd left it and walked out. She listened to his footsteps until they were gone. Then she turned back to the console. She pulled the legal pad toward her. She wrote the date, the time, the flag notation from the administrative review sheet. and Morrow's initials in the bottom right corner. She documented it the same way she had documented everything else. Flat, confirmed, dated, signed. She reached into her jacket pocket and touched the 2 sealed envelopes. Still there. She was still writing. That was the only thing at 22:41 hours on a Tuesday night in an installation rated Category 4 that remained fully in her control. By morning, those sealed envelopes would mean nothing, not because they'd been found, but because by then she would have said Calloway's call sign aloud in a room where witnesses could hear it, and the institution would have all the technically correct charge it needed. And that is how she ended up sitting alone in a 6x10 barracks room, listening to a fluorescent tube hum, waiting for an institution to finish deciding what to do with her. But that room was still 4 days away when Nora set the plaintext call sign on the console in front of Specialist Dex Calloway. She did not accuse him. She did not raise her voice. She set the page down flat, edges squared, and she waited. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word harbor below. Then we continue the story. Calloway looked at it. His energy drink was at his elbow. His face went through something. Not surprise, not the compressed nervousness she had cataloged for weeks. Something older. Something that had been sitting behind his eyes for a long time and had just been given permission to show itself. "You want to explain," she said, "why your initials are on 3 of the atmospheric interference filings that were dated after you arrived here?" He did not answer right away. He picked up the energy drink. He set it back down without drinking. "Dex," she said his name once, flat. "The filings are dated. Your initials are there. And this call sign pulled from frequency band 7 on a Tuesday night matches an active counterintelligence officer in open federal registry. Walk me through that. You don't understand what you found." His voice came out quietly, too quietly. The register she now recognized as Morrow's cadence worn over Calloway's vocal cords. "If you file that, you won't just lose your clearance. You'll disappear into a process that takes 5 years and leaves nothing behind. Nothing." His hands were shaking, not a tremor. A shake. The energy drink trembled against the console surface when he set it down too hard. She watched his hands. She noted them. "Nothing," he said again, like the word was supposed to land heavier the second time. She looked at him. She looked at the initials on the atmospheric interference filing. She looked back at him. "Thank you, Dex," she said. He picked up his jacket. He did not say anything else. He walked out of the signals room and the door clicked shut behind him and the receivers kept humming the way they always did. Patient, indifferent, cycling through their pre-transmission sequence on a frequency band that had been active since before either of them was posted here. Nora pulled the legal pad toward her. She opened it to a fresh page. Date, time, his exact words. She wrote them in quotes, full quotation, nothing paraphrased. The shaking hands. The energy drink set down too hard. The fact that he had not answered the question she asked and had instead issued a consequence. She wrote that last part twice in 2 separate notations because the pivot from explanation to threat was the data point. That was the whole story in one exchange. 3 copies. The 3rd copy went into the sealed envelope. She pressed the flap down hard, her right palm flat against the paper, and the ink from the return address bled slightly onto the outer edge of her hand, the same place, the same stain, every time. She addressed it in block letters. 2 days later, Harrow called her in. He placed the charge form on the desk. He did not slide it toward her. He placed it corner squared as though the precision of its placement was itself an argument. Unauthorized frequency monitoring outside her assigned operational parameters. Her name in the subject line. The charge date. His signature at the bottom, already applied. The charge was accurate. That was the whole point. She had exceeded her assigned parameters. She had done it deliberately, in week 2, because the only way to find what she found was to look where she had not been told to look. The violation was real. It was also the container Morrow had built for exactly this outcome. She signed the acknowledgement of receipt. Harrow watched her sign it. Something moved across his face. Not satisfaction exactly. The release of a man who has been waiting for resistance and has received compliance instead, and does not quite know what to do with the absence of a fight. She set the pen down. "Clearance suspended as of 1700 hours, he said. "You'll be escorted to barracks pending review." She nodded. "You can request representation through the JAG office," he said. "You have 72 hours. She nodded again. He picked up the charge form. He tapped it twice against the desk surface to align the edges. He placed it in the manila folder to his left. The folder was thin, only 2 or 3 sheets inside, which meant this was the first layer, not the full file. The full file would build over time, the way these things always did, accumulating procedural weight until the person at the center of it was buried not under any single charge, but under the aggregate mass of every notation, every flag, every administrative requirement that had been technically fulfilled. She stood. She looked at him across the desk. "Sir," she said. He did not respond. He had already opened the folder again and was reviewing the charge form the way a man reviews a document he wrote himself, not reading it, confirming it. The escort was a duty officer she did not know. He did not speak on the walk across the installation. The late afternoon was cold, the kind of cold that came off the Appalachian Ridge in long flat sheets that found the gap between collar and neck no matter how the jacket was worn. Her boots on the gravel, the signals annex receding behind her. The barracks room was 6 feet by 10 feet, cinder block painted gray, a cot with a wool blanket. A desk bolted to the wall, a single fluorescent tube overhead that buzzed at a frequency just below the pitch of the annex receivers, close enough that if she closed her eyes in the right way, she could almost pretend she was still at the console. The duty officer left. The door did not lock from the outside. She was not under arrest. She was under administrative review, which meant the door was open but the installation was closed, which was a different kind of cage. She sat on the cot. She listened to the fluorescent tube. Harrow could stamp atmospheric interference on every document she had left behind. Morrow could initiate a DIA administrative review. Calloway could initial every reclassification form they handed him. None of that reached what was already in transit. She called Margaret from the barracks room phone at 19:06 hours. The call lasted 4 minutes, the longest yet. "There's an administrative review," Nora said. "It's going to take some time." A pause. Margaret did not ask what kind of review. She had learned early in Nora's posting not to ask questions she would not be given answers to. "How much time?" Margaret said. "I don't know yet." Another pause. "The mortgage payment, the direct deposit that was scheduled for the 15th. Already cleared," Nora said. "I checked before. It went through on the 12th. $4,200. You're covered through next month." She heard Margaret exhale. Not relief exactly, something quieter than relief. The sound a person makes when a number they have been afraid to look at turns out to be what they hoped it was. "I made pot roast tonight," Margaret said. "How was it?" "It was fine. I put in too much rosemary again." "You always put in too much rosemary." "I know." A beat. "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Nora." "Yes." "Come home when you can," Margaret said. "I will," Nora said. She hung up. She sat in the cinder block room with the fluorescent tube buzzing overhead, and she thought about the pot roast and the rosemary and the $4,200 that had cleared on the 12th, and she thought about the sealed envelopes, and she picked up the legal pad and kept writing. Harrow came the next morning. He did not sit. He stood in the doorway of the barracks room with his hands behind his back and his uniform correct, ribbons still crooked, and he delivered the assessment the way a garrison commander delivers an administrative inevitability. She said nothing. "The monitoring violation is real, Voss. It's in the record." He let that land for a moment. "Take the separation. There's no version of this where a specialist's word beats a 20-year service record. Not at this installation." Another pause. "Not anywhere." He looked at her. She looked back. "We're Category 4, he said. "Nobody's watching." She waited until he finished. She waited until the silence that followed his last sentence had expanded enough that he would know she had heard every word and weighed it. "Thank you, sir," she said. He left. His footsteps in the corridor were measured, unhurried, the walk of a man who believes the outcome is already written. She picked up the legal pad. She wrote the date. She wrote the time. She wrote his exact words in full quotation, nothing paraphrased. She wrote, "Offered administrative separation." She wrote, "Nobody's watching." She wrote it twice. Then she wrote the date of the charge form, the date of the clearance suspension, and the name of the duty officer who had escorted her to barracks. She made 3 copies. The third copy she folded into thirds and set on the corner of the desk. She had nothing to do but wait and document, so she documented. On the third evening, she heard footsteps stop outside the barracks room door. Not the duty officer's walk, different weight distribution. A pause at the threshold. She was on the floor beside it before she had consciously decided to move. She opened it carefully, pressing her thumb under the flap rather than tearing. Inside, 2 sheets. She read it once. She read it again. Her hand was not entirely steady. She made it stay flat against the page anyway, the same deliberate pressure, the same ink bleeding slightly onto the outer edge of her palm. The second sheet was a single paragraph on Senate Intelligence Committee letterhead, stamped with the committee's secure intake office address in Washington, D.C. The attorney had forwarded the materials, both sets, Under statutory whistleblower protection provisions, the committee's secure intake had acknowledged receipt, the committee had the evidence, the sealed, triplicated, attorney-logged, whistleblower-protected evidence. Harrow's charge was real and on the record and technically valid, and would bury her in a process that took 5 years and left nothing behind. The evidence was already inside a room he could not reach with a rubber stamp, at an address Morrow's network did not know, logged under protections that predated every administrative maneuver either of them had ever run. She thought about the 12 officials who would sit elevated in a wood-paneled room above a single witness table. She thought about what it would take to walk into that room with a manila folder and say, out loud, in front of whoever was sitting there, exactly what she had found and when she had found it and what she had done about it. She thought about the stain on the outer edge of her right palm, present on every envelope she had ever addressed and sealed and carried out of this building. She thought about 40 years. She thought about the frequency cycling through its pre-transmission hum right now, 2 buildings over with no one listening. She folded the 2 sheets once, cleanly, and set them on the corner of the desk. Then she picked up the legal pad, found a fresh page, and wrote the date, the time, and the words. Materials received, forwarded, confirmed. She underlined the last word 3 times. The legal pad would fill 2 more weeks in that fluorescent hum, every frequency and cipher she could pull from memory before the first crack appeared, and Morrow's audit threat would turn everything she had just protected into bait. 2 weeks passed in the barracks room at Fort Whitmore. The fluorescent tube overhead had developed a flicker at the 40-minute mark. Nora had timed it on the second day. She marked the interval in the margin of the legal pad and moved on. Calloway came once. He did not step inside. He stood in the doorway with a half-finished energy drink at his elbow. He must have set it on the frame because his hands were empty, and he said the Administrative Review Board was moving faster than expected. "I'm sorry about how things went," he said. His voice dropped on the word sorry, the way a voice drops when the speaker knows the word is not accurate but cannot locate the accurate one. Nora looked at him the way she looked at data. She let the silence expand until it had enough weight for him to feel it. He left. His footsteps were quick going down the corridor, a man walking away from something he had already decided not to understand. She went back to the legal pad. The second letter from the civilian attorney arrived on a Thursday. Nora read it standing at the desk, still in the wool blanket she had wrapped around her shoulders against the morning cold coming off the ridge. The Senate Intelligence Committee's Secure Intake Office had acknowledged receipt of the materials. A closed hearing had been scheduled. Nora had been notified as the originating source and would be asked to appear as a witness. 4 weeks. She would be transported under escort as a person under administrative review, not as a cleared analyst. Not as an officer, just as a witness. The institutional equivalent of a piece of evidence that happened to be able to talk. She read the letter twice. She set it face down on the legal pad. She looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent tube flickered, right on schedule. She called Margaret that evening from the barracks phone. The call lasted 6 minutes. "I'm going to be traveling soon," Nora said. "For a review." "When?" 4 weeks, maybe a little less. A pause. She heard the sound of a pot on the stove. Margaret setting something down carefully, the way she handled things when she was listening hard. "Is it going to be all right?" Margaret said. "Yes. You sound like someone who just decided it's going to be all right. That's different from it actually being all right." "I know. I made the pot roast again," Margaret said. "How was it?" "I put in too much rosemary again." "You always put in too much rosemary." "I know. The photograph on the mantel is dusty." "That one of you in uniform. I should dust it." "Dust it when you feel like it," Nora said. "I'll come see it when I get home." "Promise?" "Yes." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment before setting it on the hook. The $4,200 direct deposit had cleared on the 12th. Margaret was covered through next month. The rosemary was too much, same as always. Some things held. She picked up the legal pad. She turned to a fresh page and wrote 4 weeks and underlined it. The third letter arrived 2 days later. It was not from the attorney. It was from the base adjutant's office. The paper was heavier than the attorney's stationery, official stock, the kind that carries institutional weight as a design choice. The letterhead carried a directorate code in the upper right corner, Morrow's directorate. Nora set the letter on the desk and read the code twice. She knew it. She had logged it 11 months ago when she was cross-referencing the routing anomaly against the station's administrative accounts. The same code, the same office. She turned the letter over. On the back, handwritten in tight block print, someone careful about being seen, someone who had thought about exactly how much pressure to use so the indentation would not show through. was a single paragraph. She read it once. They know it went to the committee. The audit is to build parallel cause. They're going to argue the evidence was improperly obtained before the hearing can proceed. No signature, no return address, nothing to trace. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm pressed flat against the paper as she held it. She could feel her pulse against the back of the page. Was the hearing already compromised? Could Morrow's directorate flag the intercept logs as exceeding her station's operational mandate, technically valid, exactly like Harrow's charge, and get the committee to declare the materials inadmissible before a single question was asked? She set the letter face down beside the attorney's notification. The fluorescent tube buzzed, steady, patient, indifferent to the answer. 3 days would pass before the men in civilian dress arrived at Fort Whitmore with Morrow's directorate code on their credentials, and Calloway would learn exactly how much pressure the audit could apply before anyone asked permission to apply it. The letter from the civilian attorney arrived on a Tuesday, 3 pages, single-spaced. Nora read all 3 pages standing at the desk. Still in her boots from the morning walk the guard allowed her each day at 0600. Her breath came in slow. Her jaw stayed level. Their formal finding had been delivered to the Senate Intelligence Committee's General Counsel within 24 hours. The attorney's letter quoted it directly. She read the language aloud in the empty room because she needed to hear it as a sound, not just a mark on paper. The originating analyst operated outside authorized parameters. Any findings derived from that access carry a fruit of the poison tree vulnerability that this board is empowered to address prior to certification. Fruit of the poison tree, Morrow's language. Bureaucratic calm pressed flat over 40 years of deliberate concealment. She set the letter on the legal pad. She looked at the wall. Could Morrow actually pull it off? Could a procedural ruling erase 11 months of documented evidence because the analyst who found it sat at the wrong console? She already knew the answer was yes. That was the mechanism. That was always the mechanism. She picked up the legal pad. She turned to a fresh page. See? She wrote 2 words at the top, 48 hours. Calloway knocked on the barracks door at 1400, not the quick knock of a man stopping by. A single, deliberate knock, the kind you make when you have decided to do something and you are not going to undecide it. He was standing in the doorway with a manila folder pressed against his ribs. No energy drink this time. His hands were around the folder instead, both of them, the way you hold something you do not want to drop. "Come in," Nora said. He stepped inside. He looked at the room. The legal pad on the desk, the attorney's letter face down, the fluorescent tube overhead, and he did not comment on any of it. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down across from her without being invited. He set the folder on the legal pad in front of her. "Open it," he said. She opened it. At the bottom, a signature. Morrow's signature. She read the document twice. Her pulse was steady. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm pressed against the edge of the page. "They designated my console outside oversight parameters before I arrived," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." Calloway's voice was flat, not the dropping voice from the barracks doorway 2 weeks ago. Something harder than that. They needed it to be outside protocol, so that anything found on those frequencies could be ruled out of scope, so that the log could be declared unauthorized, because they already knew what was on those frequencies. They've known since 1981. He looked at her directly. "I've been carrying that document for 2 months. She looked at him. She let the silence hold. "Why are you bringing it to me now?" she said. He pressed his hands flat on his knees. "Because the review board convened this morning. Because I was in the room when they convened it. And because Morrow was sitting at the back of the room as a non-voting observer, and he was clicking his silver pen once before every answer the board chair gave, and I understood exactly what that meant." He stopped. "I've been running small errands for his network for 2 years. Routing confirmation codes, misfiling intercept logs, flagging analysts who showed unusual interest in the retired frequency bands." His jaw tightened. "I told myself each one was harmless. I did not know about the call sign. I did not know about the active officer. When you recovered that plain text, I understood what I had been part of." "You threatened me," Nora said, "in this doorway. You said the process that buries people takes 5 years and leaves nothing." "I know." He did not look away. "I was scared. I am still scared, but I am more scared of being the last person holding the errand bag when this falls, and I believe it is going to fall. Because you mailed those envelopes before anyone could stop you, and whatever is in them is already somewhere Morrow cannot reach." She held his gaze for a long moment. "What are you offering?" she said. "Testimony. Under limited immunity, if your attorney can arrange it." I will identify all 7 individuals in the network. I will confirm the routing codes, the cipher variants, the shell entities. I will confirm that the protocol exclusion for receiver bank C was deliberate. He picked up the Morrow document from the folder, and I will confirm this signature. She said nothing for a moment. They called it administrative hygiene, Calloway said. Keep the console outside protocol so any anomalous log can be ruled out of scope. It has been working since 1981. Nobody ever found anything because nobody was ever supposed to look. She picked up the document. She read the signature again. She set it back in the folder. You understand what you are doing? She said. Yes. You understand that immunity does not erase 2 years. It only changes what happens next. Yes. And you are doing this because you are afraid, not because it is right. He looked at her for a moment. I am doing it because it is both. I think most decisions that matter are both. She did not answer that. She closed the folder. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word lighthouse below. Then we continue the story. The review board's preliminary finding arrived in the barracks room at 1600. A single page from the adjutant's office. No cover letter. The language was the same as the attorney's citation. Improperly obtained. Certification at risk. Final ruling pending. A box at the bottom was checked. Non-binding preliminary assessment. Final determination pending plenary session. Morrow had not ruled yet. He was waiting for something. She sat at the desk and looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent tube buzzed. Steady. Patient. What was he waiting for? She thought through it the way she thought through frequency anomalies. You look at what the signal is doing. You look at what it is not doing. You look at why the gap exists. Morrow had the votes to rule. He had the board. He had the institutional language. He could have ended the hearing before she ever sat down at the witness table. He had not ruled. He was waiting to see if she would break first. He was waiting to see if the barracks room and the preliminary finding in the 48-hour window would produce a retraction, a withdrawal, a quiet agreement to let the atmospheric interference stamp stand. That was the mechanism. Bury her long enough, hard enough, until she decided it was not worth the cost. She opened the legal pad to the page that said 48 hours. She underlined it. The attorney's emergency letter slid under the barracks door at 17:30. She was still at the desk. She heard it before she saw it, the soft drag of the envelope against the concrete floor. She picked it up. She opened it. She walked back to the door and knocked once on the inside frame. The guard appeared. She handed him a single piece of paper with Calloway's name and barracks number and a 3-word message. The window is open. The guard looked at the paper. He looked at her. I can't deliver personal messages, Specialist, he said. I know, she said. But you can confirm to Specialist Calloway that the committee's general counsel has requested his voluntary appearance within 48 hours for a limited immunity proceeding. That is not a personal message. That is an official notification. He held the paper. He did not hand it back. She waited. He turned and walked down the corridor. She closed the door. She sat back down at the desk. She put the attorney's letter beside the Morrow protocol document inside the manila folder and set the folder on top of the legal pad. The review board's final ruling was 48 hours away. The hearing was 48 hours after that. Calloway had the document. The committee had the window. Morrow was sitting in a review board session with his silver pen, waiting for her to decide the cost was too high. Was the cost too high? Margaret's mortgage had cleared on the 12th. The photograph on the mantel needed dusting. There was too much rosemary in the pot roast, same as always. The fluorescent tube buzzed overhead. The wind came off the Appalachian Ridge and pressed against the cinder block wall. She was not going to retract anything. That was not a decision she made in the barracks room that evening. It was a decision she had made 11 months ago at 200 hours when a 57-year-old man with crooked ribbons on his breast pocket had struck her palm with a metal spine, kicked the legal pad under the console, and walked out without looking back. She picked up the pen. She turned to a fresh page on the legal pad. At the top, she wrote, Calloway, voluntary appearance required, 48 hours. Below that, she wrote the names of 3 shell entities, the routing codes Calloway had just confirmed, and the date on Morrow's protocol designation document. She wrote them in plain sentences, the way she had been writing everything, the way you explain something to a jury that has never heard of Fort Whitmore, never heard of any of it. She was still writing when a second envelope appeared under the door. She looked at it without moving for a moment. Then she crossed the room, picked it up, and turned it over. No return address. Tight block print on the front. The same handwriting as the warning on the back of the audit letter. She opened it. Inside was a single index card. 3 words. Calloway already called. She read it twice. She set it on the desk beside the manila folder. 48 hours. 48 hours would not be enough. 4 days from now, she would be sitting at a different table entirely, in a room where witnesses wore dress uniforms, and the words she had written would be read aloud into a record that could not be unwritten. 4 days later, she was back at a table, not a barracks table, not a console, but the only table that mattered. The transport van had taken 3 hours through early fog, 2 general service soldiers up front who did not speak to her, a manila folder on her lap, the ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm pressed against the edge of it the entire way. She had not slept. She had not tried to. She had sat in the dark of the van and gone through every line of every document in the folder the way she had gone through frequency logs, once for accuracy, once for sequence, once for what was missing. Nothing was missing. She had made sure of that 11 months ago. She had imagined it many times. Calloway was already seated when she entered. Lower tier of the gallery, one level below the committee members, separated from Harrow and Morrow by a stretch of empty chairs. He was in dress uniform. His hands were on his knees. He was looking at his hands. The half-finished energy drink he always had at his elbow was not here. Nothing was at his elbow. He looked reduced without it, more honest. Harrow sat in the gallery's upper tier in full dress uniform, ribbons slightly crooked on his left breast pocket, the same slight left lean they had always had. He was watching the door when she came in. His expression did not change. He looked at her the way he always had, like a problem that had already been filed and stamped, like something atmospheric. Morrow sat 2 seats from Harrow in a civilian suit. The silver pen was in his right hand, uncapped, not yet clicking. He was reading something on the table in front of him. He did not look up when she entered. She walked to the witness table and sat down. She set the manila folder in front of her. She did not open it yet. Senator Gerald Ashford sat at the center of the gallery with his reading glasses resting in his left hand. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the cold open of this whole year, like an institution taking a measurement. He removed his glasses slowly, holding them by one arm, and asked his first question. Specialist Voss, are you aware of the review board's preliminary admissibility finding regarding the scope of your frequency monitoring activities? Yes, Senator. Do you wish to address that finding before presenting your materials? Nora opened the manila folder. She did not address the admissibility finding. She presented the evidence in order. That was the only sequence that mattered. You do not argue the frame. You replace it. She read the relevant line directly into the microphone. Her voice did not waver. Receiver Bank C frequency monitoring designated outside standard oversight parameters, effective immediately, non-reviewable absent directorate authorization. She looked up. The same directorate now claiming my access was unauthorized is the directorate that removed the console from oversight before I arrived. If the exclusion was deliberate, the unauthorized access charge was engineered, not incidental. The review board cannot use as its procedural bar a parameter created by the network under investigation. The room did not move, not a chair, not a breath. Harrow's jaw tightened. His hands came together on the gallery rail. He said nothing yet. Morrow's silver pen went still. She did not repeat herself. She cited each point once and moved. She named them one by one. Halloran Technical Consulting Incorporated, Meridian Signal Solutions, LLC, Coastal Defense Review Group, Limited. The names landed in the room like separate weights. She felt them land. She watched the committee members at the upper tier reach for their own documents, cross-referencing, confirming what she had just said against what their own staff had prepared. She had known they would have the appendices. She had counted on it. The $4.2 million is not a budget error, she said. It is the financial spine of the network, confirmed by public record, cross-referenced against 11 years of administrative routing, traceable to an operation that has been running since 1981. Ashford put his reading glasses back on. He looked at the documents being passed along the gallery. He said nothing yet. He was reading. She waited. Calloway was invited to the table at 9:47. He walked from the lower gallery to the witness chair beside her table with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who has made a decision and intends to complete it before he loses his nerve. He sat down. He looked at the microphone. He looked at the folder in front of him. He put his hands flat on the table. State your name and assignment for the record, the committee's general counsel said. His voice dropped on the first sentence. It did not recover its full register for the next 20 minutes, but he did not stop, not once. He named 2 members of the network he could directly identify, names, agency affiliations, the specific routing functions they performed. He set the documents on the table in front of him the way you set down something you have been carrying for too long. The general counsel conferred with Ashford. 40 seconds. Low voices. Ashford read a paragraph from the preliminary finding. He removed his reading glasses. He looked at Morrow. Morrow clicked his silver pen once. The sound was very loud. One of the committee members at the far end of the upper gallery, a woman with silver hair and reading glasses of her own, set her pen down on her notepad, not to write something, because her hand needed to be free. Morrow's head came up. He looked at Ashford directly. For the first time since Nora had entered the room, he looked like something other than a man reading documents. He looked like a man watching a door close. Then Harrow spoke. "Senator." His voice was garrison-clipped, contempt still alive in it even now. "These materials were assembled by an analyst operating outside her authorized parameters. That is not in dispute. Whatever the origin of the exclusion, she exceeded the scope of her assignment. She was a specialist. She was 23. She was not cleared for the frequency band she was monitoring, and she was not cleared for the level of analysis she conducted. This committee cannot certify findings produced by Major Harrow." Ashford's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You are here as a witness, not as counsel, not as a reviewing authority." He paused. The pause was 1 full second. "If you speak again without being recognized, I will have you removed from this gallery." Harrow's mouth closed. The contempt did not leave his face, but his hands, which had been gripping the gallery rail, went slowly still. He set them flat on the table in front of him, and they did not move again. She was a specialist. She was 23. The words were still in the room, not a defense. The sound of a man who had spent 20 years building a frame around the world and had just watched someone walk through the frame without touching it. Ashford turned back to Nora. He removed his reading glasses for the last time, holding them by one arm, and he asked the question she had known was coming since the moment she first opened the manila folder 11 months ago. "Specialist Voss, how long did you know before you filed?" The room was very quiet. Nora leaned toward the microphone. She did not rush. She had earned the pace of this answer. "I knew the morning after Major Harrow struck my hand," she said. "I spent 4 months making certain I was right." 4 months to be certain is not hesitation. No one spoke. 12 people sat in the gallery above her, and not one of them spoke, and the silence was not shocked. It was the silence of a room that has recalibrated, the silence of an institution that has been handed evidence it cannot dispute and is in the process of accepting what that means. Harrow's hands were still on the table. He was looking at them, and then Morrow's silver pen dropped. It hit the gallery floor with a sharp, small sound, lighter than you would expect from something that had been his anchor in every room he had ever controlled. It rolled 2 inches and stopped against the leg of his chair. He looked at it. He did not pick it up. One of the 2 general-grade officers, the one on the left, senior by insignia, turned to look at the other. It was not a collegial look. It was the look of 2 men who have been sitting inside a structure for 20 years and have just understood, at the same moment, what the structure was built on. The officer on the right reached for his water glass and did not drink from it. He set it back down. His hand was not steady. Ashford replaced his reading glasses and opened the next file on the committee desk. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of institutional finality, the kind that cannot be appealed in this room, in this hour, by anyone present. Nora looked down at the folder. She found the page. She looked up. She read it. 7 characters, calm and precise, into the silence of a wood-paneled room that had no windows and no exit from what was happening inside it. Each character distinct, no hesitation. When she finished, the room held the silence for a long moment. "The call sign is logged," Ashford said, "as a congressional finding identifying an active counterintelligence asset whose operational identity has been compromised by the named network." The silver-haired committee member at the far end of the gallery exhaled. It was audible. The man beside her picked up his pen and set it down again without writing anything. The 2 general-grade officers did not exchange another look. They were both looking at Morrow now. Morrow was looking at the pen on the floor. He had not moved to retrieve it. Nora exhaled. 1 breath, full. The first full breath since 200 hours on the morning of week 1, when a 57-year-old man with crooked ribbons on his left breast pocket had struck her palm with a metal spine and walked out without looking back. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm pressed against the edge of the table. She felt it. She did not look at it. The hearing continued. There were procedural questions. Sequencing of the network member identifications, scheduling of Calloway's subsequent 11 days of testimony, the formal separation of the review board's proceedings from the committee's certification. Ashford handled each item in measured cadence, long pauses before verdicts. The two general-grade officers did not speak. They were present as witnesses, and what they were witnessing was being processed at a speed their institutional training had not prepared them for. Harrow did not speak. His ribbons were slightly crooked on his left breast pocket. The hearing closed at 14:22. As the gallery above her began the slow, deliberate motion of officials gathering documents and leaving by rank, Nora sat at the witness table for a moment longer than necessary. She closed the manila folder. She placed both hands flat on it. The ink stain on her right palm was dark against the buff-colored cardboard. She was aware, without looking up, that Senator Gerald Ashford had not yet moved from his chair. She could feel the weight of his attention the way you feel a signal on a frequency you have been trained to hear. Present, directional, requiring interpretation. She looked up. Ashford was looking at her. He had replaced his reading glasses, but he was not looking at any document. He was looking at her the way the institution looks at something it has not yet decided how to use. Not with warmth, not with hostility, with the careful, unresolved attention of a measuring instrument that has just encountered a reading outside its expected range, asset, or problem. The question was still in his face. The verdict was not stated. It would not be stated today. Nora held his gaze for 1 second. Then she looked down at the folder. She opened it to the next page, the frequency logs. 11 months of them, organized by date, annotated in plain language, the cipher variant notations cross-referenced in the margin in a hand that never wavered. She found the entry for week 2, the first burst transmission on the retired Soviet frequency band, logged at 03:47 hours, and she read it once, quietly to herself. The receivers at Fort Whitmore were still humming. She could not hear them from here, but she knew they were. The indictment would come the next morning, sealed and unsigned, naming Morrow as the network's spine, but Nora would not yet know that the frequency logs she was reading now were already the evidence that would break him. The day after the hearing, Daniel Morrow was indicted under seal by the Department of Justice National Security Division. The charges were read into the federal record by a prosecutor who had been working the case for 11 days, with materials Nora had never seen assembled all in one place. Unauthorized transmission of classified intelligence to a foreign power, obstruction of a congressional proceeding, conspiracy to suborn a material witness through the pre-assignment protocol designation document that had been used to engineer the admissibility challenge. Bail was denied. His personal effects were logged and held. The silver pen was in the inventory, item 7 on a list of 9. Morrow did not speak when the finding was read. The man who had spent 40 years running a 7-person network across 3 federal agencies, who had built his operational method on the certainty that the machinery he controlled would always outrun the people it was aimed at, sat in a federal holding room and did not click his pen once. He did not have it anymore. 72 hours after the hearing closed, Major Aldrich Harrow was separated from command by order of the senior general-grade officer who had been present in the gallery, not court-martialed, separated. The distinction was administrative. The result was permanent. He handed in his identification badge at the Fort Whitmore security desk on a Thursday morning. The duty officer at the desk did not stand. He logged the badge without looking up. Harrow's ribbons were slightly crooked on his left breast pocket when he walked out. Nobody straightened them. Nobody said anything at all. The administrative charge Harrow had filed against Nora, unauthorized frequency monitoring, technically valid, carefully constructed. The mechanism that had been built to contain her was vacated from the military record that same afternoon. The committee's legal counsel entered the vacatur into the congressional record under a formal notation, charge filed as an instrument of network-engineered administrative suppression. Harrow's name was in that notation too. Aldrich James Harrow, Major United States Army. Every word of it in the public record now, in plain language, where it would stay. Fort Whitmore's category: 4 operational designation, minimal operational value. The rating that had made the station an official burial ground for inconvenient personnel was suspended pending full review. The supply requisition accounts through which $4.2 million had routed annually for 11 consecutive fiscal years were frozen by Treasury order within the week. 3 of the shell entities through which the routing had moved were dissolved by court order within 10 days of the freeze. The DIA review board that had convened to argue Nora's evidence was improperly obtained. Morrow's last institutional countermove, the parallel cause strategy the anonymous handwritten note had warned her about, did not survive Callaway's testimony. 2 of its 4 auditors were identified in Callaway's statement as network adjacent. Both were referred for investigation. The review board's preliminary admissibility finding was formally expunged from the congressional record. The word the committee's legal counsel used in the expungement notation was manufactured, not disputed, not premature, manufactured. The $4.2 million routing anomaly was certified in the committee's final report as the primary financial evidence linking all 7 members of the network. It was referred to the Department of Justice for civil forfeiture action against the 3 shell entities and against any assets held in Morrow's personal accounts traceable to the routing chain. Calloway testified for 11 days. He sat at the same witness table where Nora had sat, in the same wood-paneled room, with his hands flat on the table the way a man holds onto a surface when he is afraid of what he is about to let go of. His voice dropped on the first sentence each morning. It found its register eventually. He kept going. He confirmed the 6 intercept entries he had misfiled on Morrow's direct instruction. He named the frequency monitoring protocol exclusion for receiver bank C. He named the 2 network members he could identify from direct contact, and then, as the days continued and the committee pressed him into the corners of his 2 years of errand running, he named more. Quick pause. If you've made it this far, comment the word compass below, then we continue the story. On day 6, he named the oldest active member of the network, a man who had been running since 1981 before Nora was born, who had survived 4 administrations, 2 major counterintelligence reviews, and 11 consecutive fiscal years of a $4.2 million routing line that no one had looked at hard enough until a 23-year-old sat down at a receiver bank that was supposed to be invisible and started listening. By day 11, all 7 members had been named. All 7 were referred for prosecution. Calloway's immunity was confirmed on the final day of testimony. He walked out of the hearing room into a corridor that was not empty. 2 investigators from the National Security Division were waiting. They thanked him for his cooperation. He did not look relieved. He looked like a man who had put something down and could not yet tell if his hands were lighter or just empty. Nobody handed Nora a bulletin about any of this. The information arrived in pieces: a personnel officer's summary, a brief from the committee's legal staff, a single paragraph in a classified annex she was allowed to read in a supervised room and not take notes from. She read each piece once. She did not ask follow-up questions. She already knew the architecture. She had built it, in triplicate, before anyone in that hearing room had known her name. 3 weeks after the hearing, she was in a temporary office at a facility whose name she was not authorized to repeat outside that room. The personnel officer was a man in a gray suit who had a manila folder on his desk and a cup of black coffee he had not touched since she sat down. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk without ceremony. Direct commission to second lieutenant, assignment to a named counterintelligence unit. "You have 24 hours to decide," he said. That was all. No speech, no handshake, no performance of the moment. She picked up the paper. She read it once slowly from the top. She set it back down, face up on the desk. That evening she called Margaret. The call lasted 4 minutes. Margaret picked up on the second ring. She was in the kitchen. Nora could hear the particular quiet of that house behind her mother's voice, the refrigerator hum, the faint scrape of a chair on tile. "I've been offered a position," Nora said. "Is it a good one?" "I think so." "All right." Margaret did not ask for details she was not going to get. She never had. "The photograph on the mantel is still there. I dusted it last week." "I'm glad." A pause, not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that exists between people who have said the necessary things and do not need to fill the rest. "Are you eating?" Margaret asked. "Yes. The pot roast is in the refrigerator, if you come home this weekend." "I'll try," Nora said. She meant it. That was the best she had. Margaret took it. The call ended without ceremony, the way their calls always ended. Nothing unresolved, nothing falsely resolved, just the phone quiet in her hand and the line going still. She accepted the commission the next morning. She signed the paper with the pen she kept in her left breast pocket. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm was still there. Faint now, but there. She was escorted to Fort Whitmore Signal's annex that afternoon. The gravel lot outside the installation was the same gravel it had been the morning she stepped off a transport bus at dawn 11 months ago. Same color, same density, same sound under her boots. The 2-lane road behind her was empty. The ridgeline above was the same ridgeline it had always been, indifferent and permanent, the kind of geography that does not register the events that happen underneath it. The annex was empty of all other personnel. The halls that had carried the sound of Calloway's footsteps, the echo of Harrow's voice from behind a closed office door, the low, bureaucratic hum of an installation pretending to be invisible, all of that was gone. What remained was the building itself, cinder block, recycled air, the smell of machine oil that had accumulated over decades in the ventilation system and could not be cleaned out, only lived with. She walked to the signals room. The receivers were still humming. The frequency just below hearing, the one you stopped noticing after the first week and never stopped being aware of. Receiver bank C was where she had left it. Console, headphone jack, frequency dial. The console that had been placed outside protocol to make it invisible, to make anything found on it deniable, to make her deniable. She sat down. She set a fresh legal pad beside the console. She picked up a pencil. She put the headphones on. The receivers came into her hearing fully, not louder but present, the way a signal comes into resolution when you have adjusted the dial 1/4 turn past the noise floor. She did not write anything yet. She listened. The observation window above and behind her was dark, except for one silhouette. She knew whose it was before she turned to look, and she did not turn to look. She had felt his attention in that wood-paneled hearing room, and she felt it now. The same quality, the same unresolved measurement. Senator Gerald Ashford, watching. The institution watching through him, trying to decide. Asset or problem. She knew the question was still open. She had known it would be. A 23-year-old who had exceeded her operational parameters, mailed sealed evidence to a civilian attorney without authorization, and brought down a network that had survived for 40 years was not a straightforward administrative category. The institution did not have a clean box for her. It was going to have to build one or leave her in the space between boxes, and it had not yet decided which. She was not going to turn around and make it easier for them. The frequency dial was set to receiver bank C's primary monitoring range. She checked the calibration log. Someone had run a maintenance pass 2 days prior. The settings were correct. She noted the date on the fresh legal pad, and the time, and the current atmospheric conditions from the readout on the console's right panel. Then she found the frequency she had been on the morning of week 2, when the first burst transmission had come through on a band that was supposed to be dead. She did not dial to it as a memorial gesture. She dialed to it because it was a live monitoring range with an 11-month intercept history that had not yet been fully cross-referenced against the network's known communication architecture. There was still work to do on it. There was always still work to do. The pencil was in her hand. The legal pad was blank and waiting. The receivers hummed at the frequency just below hearing, and above them, through the glass of the observation window, Gerald Ashford watched a 23-year-old analyst sit alone at a cleared console and go back to work. He still had not decided. She already had. 4 months to be certain is not hesitation. Neither is this. Nora Voss, 23, soldier, analyst, still listening. The pencil did not move for another 3 minutes, not because she was uncertain, not because she was waiting for permission. She was running the calibration check the way she always ran it, the way she had run it the morning of week 2, the morning of week 9, every morning in between when the console had been hers to work, and every morning since it had been returned to her. The check had a sequence. The sequence had a reason. She did not skip steps. Ashford had not moved either. She could tell by the quality of the silence at the observation window. There was the silence of a room someone had just left, and there was the silence of a room someone was still in, and she had spent 11 months learning the difference. The one behind her now was occupied, watchful, and entirely still. It had the quality of a held question. She was not going to answer it by turning around. The first entry went onto the fresh legal pad in her precise block hand. Date, time, receiver bank C, atmospheric conditions nominal, calibration confirmed against prior maintenance log, monitoring range set. She pressed the pencil to paper with the outer edge of her right palm resting against the pad, the ink stain from all the prior legal pads settling into its familiar position against the new page. Then she listened. The frequency was quiet. That was expected. The network was dismantled. Calloway's 11 days of testimony had named all 7 members across 3 agencies, and the oldest active member, running since 1981, 43 years of operational silence, had been picked up in a federal building in the Capitol 4 days after the committee accepted the findings. The architecture was down, the transmissions had stopped, but a frequency band does not stop existing because the people who used it are in custody. Someone else could find it. Someone else could decide it was useful, the way someone had decided it was useful in 1983. The monitoring range remained live. The intercept history remained incomplete. The cross-referencing work she had flagged in her final memo to the committee, the one the committee's general counsel had accepted into the record alongside the sealed duplicate evidence set from the civilian attorney, remained unfinished. There was still work to do. She wrote that in the log as well, not as a declaration, as an operational note. Monitoring range, live. Prior intercept history, partially cross-referenced. Cross-reference completion, ongoing. She dated it, initialed it, and moved to the next column. Above her, through the glass, Ashford had still not moved. She understood what he was trying to determine. She had understood it in the hearing room when he removed his reading glasses slowly before the final question, and she understood it now. A 23-year-old analyst who exceeded her operational parameters, acted unilaterally, mailed sealed evidence without authorization, and then sat alone at a witness table and brought down 40 years of compartmentalized betrayal was not a category the institution had a prepared response for. Harrow had been retired. Morrow had been indicted. Calloway had his immunity deal and his 11 days of testimony and whatever was left of his life on the other side of it. The 7 members of the network were identified, processed, and removed from the architecture they had built. That was the institution functioning correctly, once it was forced to. The question Ashford was still turning over was not whether the outcome was right. He had stated for the record that the committee accepted the findings. He had said it in the silence of a room that was recalibrating, not applauding, and it had been enough. The question was what the institution was going to do with the person who had forced its hand. Nora had no answer for him that she had not already given. She had given it in the hearing room, in a single sentence that had landed without drama and without apology. 4 months to be certain is not hesitation. She had given it in the 11 months of frequency logs, the triplicate documentation, the mailed envelope, the cipher variant lineage traced back to 1983, the $4.2 million routing anomaly cross-referenced against 3 shell entities by name in front of 12 officials and 2 general-grade officers, and both the men who had spent the better part of a year trying to bury her. She had given him everything she had. She was not going to explain it again. She was going to work. The pencil moved. The receivers hummed. The legal pad filled one line at a time, not quickly, not slowly, but at the pace of someone who understands that certainty is not a moment. It is an accumulation. It is the next log entry and the one after that and the one after that for as long as it takes. That was not doctrine. That was not training. That was the thing Nora had learned in the signals room at 0200 hours on week 1, when the metal spine of a rolled legal pad had split the skin of her palm and she had waited until the footsteps died and then retrieved the pad from under the console and smoothed the pages and gone back to work. You do not stop. You accumulate. You date it, initial it, move to the next column. The receivers hummed. The pencil moved. Ashford had not left the observation window. She noticed that without looking up. She had spent 11 months developing the habit of peripheral attention, logging what was present, what was absent, what had changed, what was exactly the same as it had been the day before. Old instinct now, the kind that does not switch off when the formal work ends. She noted that Ashford had been standing in the observation bay for 14 minutes without speaking, without signaling, without sending anyone through the door to tell her what the institution had decided. She noted that. She logged nothing, but she noted it. The question he was sitting with was a fair one. She understood that. She had no particular grievance with the fact that the institution was uncertain about her. She was uncertain about herself in some of the same ways. A 23-year-old who had exceeded her operational parameters, acted without authorization, mailed sealed evidence to a civilian attorney, and then walked alone into a closed hearing room. That was not a category with a clean entry in any manual she had ever read. She was not going to pretend otherwise. The institution's uncertainty was not contempt. It was something closer to the silence after a very loud sound when the room is still deciding what it heard. Harrow had not had that quality. Harrow's certainty about her had been immediate, reflexive, and institutional in the worst sense, the kind of certainty that functions as a substitute for assessment. He had looked at her assignment to Fort Whitmore, at her age, at the station's Category 4 rating, and he had decided. She was furniture. She was the thing you put in the room you use as a filing cabinet. His ribbons had sat slightly crooked on his left breast pocket for 11 months, and no one had told him. And that, she thought, was the smallest and most accurate measure of what Fort Whitmore had done to the people inside it. The station had stopped requiring precision of itself, and then Nora had arrived, and precision had become a problem. The pencil moved, the log filled. She thought about the phone call she had made to Margaret the night before the hearing. Her mother had answered on the second ring, voice plain and direct the way it always was. The smell of pot roast and chamomile tea traveling somehow across 300 miles of cellular infrastructure. Nora had not explained anything. Margaret had not asked for explanations she was not going to get. They had talked for 11 minutes about the cashmere cardigan that needed cleaning, about the furnace filter that needed replacing, about nothing that named the weight of what the next morning was going to require. And then Margaret had said, in the same flat, direct voice she used for everything, "Come home when it's done." Not a command, not a question, a fact stated in advance of its own arrival. Nora had said she would. She had not been home yet. The commission offer had arrived 24 hours after the hearing, and then the return to the signals room, and then the hum of the receivers and the legal pad and the pencil and the work. She would go home. She would go home when the current log sequence was complete and the cross-reference notation was entered, and the column was dated and initialed, and she had reached a natural stopping point in the accumulation. Margaret would be there. The cardigan would be on the chair by the window. That was enough to know. Ashford was still at the observation window. She turned one page of the legal pad and started the next column. The ink stain on the outer edge of her right palm pressed faintly against the paper as she wrote. She had stopped noticing it months ago. She noticed it now only because of the way the overhead fluorescent caught the edge of her hand at a certain angle, the way it had on the morning after week 1 when she had smoothed the pages of the legal pad and gone back to work, and understood, without articulating it then, that the work was the only argument she had that could not be filed away or stamped atmospheric interference and returned without being read. She had been right about that. The work was the argument. It had always been the argument. Not the memo stamped atmospheric interference, not the clearance badge with the suspension notation, not even the manila folder laid open on a wood-paneled table in front of 12 officials who had chosen finally to listen. The argument was the accumulation, column after column, page after page, the thing that could not be unfiled once it existed in the world. She wrote the date at the top of the new column. Ashford had not moved from the window. She was aware of him the way she was aware of the hum of the receivers, as a constant registered and then set aside. He had asked her in the hearing room how long she had known before she filed. 4 months to be certain is not hesitation. She had not planned that answer. It had arrived the way intercept data arrived, fully formed, requiring only recognition. Ashford had removed his reading glasses. He had looked at her across the elevated distance of the gallery and the witness table and 20 years of institutional calculus, and then he had looked at the folder, and then he had stated for the record that the committee accepted the findings. The room had gone silent, not shocked, recalibrating. That distinction mattered. Shock was temporary. Recalibration was structural. A shocked room forgot. A recalibrating room changed its wiring. Nora had watched the two general-grade officers exchange a look that was not collegial, and she had understood that the wiring was already changing in real time, that what had happened in that room would travel through the institution the way a cipher variant traveled through a frequency band, quietly below the threshold of casual notice, arriving in places its origin point could never have anticipated. Morrow's pen had dropped to the floor. Harrow had not picked it up. Those two facts in sequence had told her more than the committee's formal language. She entered a notation in the cross-reference column. The receivers hummed. The fluorescent light held steady above her. The signals room was empty of everyone except her and Ashford at the window, and the particular silence that had no category she had named yet. It was not the shocked silence of week 3 when Harrow had returned the memo without reading it. It was not the predatory silence of week 11 when Calloway had delivered his threat, and she had said nothing in return, and watched his certainty erode in real time as the nothing stretched. It was not the witnessed silence of the hearing room when the committee's recalibration completed itself and the institutional machinery redirected. This was something else. It was the silence of work continuing after the reason for the work had been proven. The silence of a frequency band that had once carried an enemy's traffic now carrying only its own carrier wave, empty of instruction, persistent in structure, present because it had always been present regardless of what it was used for. She wrote another line. Ashford still had not moved. She thought about the commission offer. Second lieutenant, the named counterintelligence unit, a direct commission, meaning no officer candidate school, no transition program, no institutional processing delay, meaning someone, somewhere in the chain above the committee had decided the cost of delay outweighed the cost of irregularity. That was a calculation she understood. She had been making it for 11 months. She had accepted within 24 hours, not because the offer resolved anything. The DIA Review Board's second inquiry was still formally open. The technical violation had been real, the unauthorized monitoring had been real, and the admissibility question was not closed simply because the committee had accepted the findings. The institution did not close its own questions. It moved them to different tables. Nora knew this. She had watched it operate for 11 months from the inside of a Category 4 posting that had been specifically designed to warehouse people the institution could not yet be seen discarding. She had accepted because the work required an address. She needed to be somewhere in order to receive the next signal. The pencil moved, the column advanced. The ink stain pressed faintly against the paper, and she let it press and wrote through it, the way she had been writing through it since the morning after week 1, since the moment she had smoothed the bent pages of the legal pad and understood that the argument was not over and had in fact barely started, and that the only thing required of her was to continue. Ashford's silhouette remained at the observation window. She did not look up. The receivers hummed at a frequency just below hearing, constant as the cold in the ridge above the installation, constant as the $4.2 million that had moved through the station's accounts for 11. If you have watched this far, you already know what kind of person stays in a 6x10 room and listens to a frequency that was supposed to be dead. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one, and drop a comment. Tell us what you would have done with that first burst transmission at 0200 hours. Would you have logged it, or would you have let it go?